What happens when you truly surrender to God? You are not exhausted because life is too heavy. You are exhausted because you are trying to do God's job. And most people never say that out loud. They call it responsibility. They call it faith. They call it being strong. But deep down, it feels like you're holding everything together with shaking hands. Like if you loosen your grip for even a moment, everything will fall apart. You smile in public, say the right things, show up when you're supposed to. But when you finally pray, you're tired. Not tired of God, just tired of carrying what you were never meant to carry. If that's you right now, listen closely. This message is not here to tell you to try harder or believe more. It's here to tell you the truth that finally lets your soul rest. And if you want words like this to find you in the quiet moments, when you don't have the strength to keep pretending, stay with this channel. Some seasons don't need advice. They need a whisper at the right time. Here's the part no one really talks about. Many people say they trust God, but what they're actually doing is asking God to protect their plans. They pray, but only as long as the outcome stays familiar. They surrender, but with conditions. They give God their pain, but they keep control tightly clenched in their fists. And that inner conflict is what's draining you. It's not God's will that's hurting you. It's the constant tug-of-war between your will and His. You're tired because you're fighting a battle you don't even realize you're in. The battle to stay in control while calling it faith. Here's the truth, said gently. Many people don't reject God. They just never let Him lead. They let Him advise. They let Him comfort. They let Him clean up the mess, but they don't let Him take the wheel. And until that changes, peace will always feel just out of reach. The moment of real surrender, returning control. So what actually happens when you truly surrender to God? Not the version people romanticize, not the version that promises instant miracles, but the real one? The first thing that happens is something inside you breaks, not in a destructive way, but in a releasing way. You realize the thing making you anxious isn't uncertainty. It's responsibility that doesn't belong to you. You were never created to carry the weight of outcomes. You were created to walk in obedience and trust the one who already sees the end from the beginning. When you surrender, you don't lose control. You return control to the one who had it all along. When you let go, heaven takes hold. That's why surrender feels terrifying at first, because control feels like safety until it quietly becomes a prison. You think holding on is what's keeping you together, when in reality, it's what's wearing you down. Jesus showed us this in the Garden of Gethsemane. This wasn't a calm, peaceful moment. This was anguish. This was pressure so intense that his sweat fell like drops of blood. The cross hadn't touched him yet, but its weight already had. And Jesus didn't pretend it was easy. He didn't deny the fear or silence the pain. He prayed honestly. And then he said the words that define true surrender. He said in Luke chapter 22, verse 42, "Not my will, but yours be done." That wasn't weakness, that was worship. Surrender is not the absence of pain. It's the decision that pain will no longer be the one in charge. When peace replaces striving. And the moment you stop fighting God for control, something shifts inside you. You don't suddenly get answers. You don't immediately see how everything will work out, but you feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Quiet. The storm around you may still be raging. Circumstances may not change overnight, but the storm inside you begins to lose its voice. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios in your mind. You stop waking up with that tight pressure in your chest. Not because life got easier, but because you're no longer trying to be God. Paul described this kind of peace when he said in Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, that the peace of God surpasses all understanding and guards your heart and your mind through Christ Jesus. That word guards matters. It means peace stands watch. It means peace takes over the job you've been exhausting yourself trying to do. When you surrender, peace stops being something you chase. It becomes something you carry. When you let go, heaven takes hold. When your desires begin to change. And then something even deeper begins to change. Your desires start to shift, not because God forces them to, but because when control loosens, clarity enters. Things that once consumed you don't shine the same way anymore. Goals that once defined you begin to feel strangely empty, and in their place, new longings form, quiet, steady, aligned. Your prayers change. They stop sounding like negotiations. They move from "God, bless what I want" to "God, shape my heart to want what you bless." David spoke of this in Psalm 37:4 when he said that as we delight ourselves in the Lord, He gives us the desires of our heart. Not by granting every wish, but by planting His desires within us. Surrender doesn't erase who you are. It restores who you were meant to be. Learning to hear God clearly. We see this in the life of Samuel. As a boy, Samuel heard God's voice but didn't recognize it. It took surrender, not striving, for clarity to come. And when he finally responded, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," his life became a channel for God's voice to an entire nation. Surrender sharpens your hearing. When you stop arguing with God, His whisper becomes unmistakable. Obedience stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like the safest place you could stand. But here's what surprises most people. Surrender rarely comes with lightning bolts or dramatic moments. More often, it comes quietly. You wake up tired but lighter, still unsure but no longer afraid. Small things begin to happen. A conversation arrives right on time. A door opens that you weren't forcing. A burden you've carried for years suddenly feels shared. And one day you realize something subtle but profound. You're not fighting anymore. You're walking. You didn't lose your life when you surrendered. You found it. Because when you place what matters most into God's hands, He doesn't waste it. He transforms it. So let me ask you the question that matters right now. What are you still holding on to? A plan you're afraid to release? A relationship you're trying to control? An outcome you keep replaying in your mind? God is not asking you to understand everything. He is asking you to trust Him with everything. Because the safest place for your future is not in your ability to manage it. It is in the hands that created it. You don't lose control when you surrender. You give it back to the one who had it all along. When you let go, heaven takes hold. If you're ready to stop carrying what you were never meant to carry, type "I surrender" in the comments, not to prove your faith, but to say, "I'm done pretending I can do this alone." And if this message found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's been holding on for too long. Because God moves when we surrender.